There are nights that split your life in two. Nights when something small and seemingly unimportant tilts just a few degrees off center, and suddenly nothing is ever the same again. That night, it was the rain. It wasn't romantic rain, not the kind that rolls gently off windows and makes you think about old songs and love letters. It was sharp, relentless, pouring down like a punishment from the sky. I remember the way the wipers struggled to keep up as I turned onto my street, how the headlights made streaks across the wet pavement, how everything shimmered in that silver, angry light. If there was a warning from the universe, it came disguised as weather. I wasn't supposed to be home. That night was meant to be spent at a late meeting, followed by drinks I didn't want with colleagues I didn't like. But I had forgotten my laptop, something so minor, so meaningless in the moment. I turned back around, frustrated, cursing under my breath, never suspecting I was driving straight into the heart of a lie so deep it would rot through everything I thought was real. The house looked quiet, warm, familiar. The porch light was on. The curtains were drawn the way she always preferred in the evenings. There was nothing unusual, nothing that screamed betrayal. That's the thing with nightmares. They don't always come with soundtracks. Sometimes they come dressed in comfort, in lavender candles and throw blankets, and everything you think means home. I parked, walked up to the door, reached for the handle, and stopped. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe some part of me, more ancient than reason, more honest than logic, knew before I heard anything. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, hand on the knob, breath fogging in the cold, letting the rain soak into my jacket. Then I heard her voice. It was faint, floating through the door, the way voices do when you're not meant to hear them. There was something off about her tone, not the voice she used with me, that warm, slightly sleepy cadence I thought I knew so well. No, this voice was different, lighter, calculated, almost rehearsed. It was a voice meant for someone else. I didn't go inside. Instead, I stood completely still, letting the rain fall harder as I tried to piece together what I was hearing. I didn't need to make out every word to feel the ground begin to shift beneath me. There was something about the rhythm, the edge in her breathing, the calmness that didn't belong to someone discussing something innocent. My stomach twisted, but I didn't move. I became part of the storm, cold, unmoving, and barely breathing. What I heard next turned everything inside me to stone. My wife was planning something, something final, something that would leave no traces. I didn't need specifics. I didn't need the full picture. It was enough to feel the quiet intent behind her words, the suggestion of violence masked in sweetness, the hunger for an ending disguised as freedom. And I knew, deep in a place that doesn't lie, that she wanted me gone. That realization didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic collapse. It came slowly, like water soaking into wood, silent, cold, and irreversible. The love of my life was no longer a wife. She was something else now, something ancient and cold and foreign. A person who had worn a mask so perfectly that I hadn't even seen the cracks. I walked back to my car like a man waking up in someone else's skin. There was no anger yet, no plan, just shock, a numbness so complete it was almost serene. I sat behind the wheel and watched the water pour down the windshield, watched it blur the world, and wondered if I'd ever see anything clearly again. I didn't drive home. Not yet. I couldn't. I didn't know what home meant anymore. Instead, I parked on the edge of town and sat in the darkness. I stared at the dashboard and thought about the thousands of moments that had led to this one. The first time I saw her laugh, the day we moved in together, the quiet mornings with coffee and music and dreams we promised would last. I thought about all the little ways I had ignored my gut, how her eyes shifted too quickly when she lied, how she grew distant when I asked questions, how the warmth in her touch began to cool months ago. I had trusted her with everything. My heart, my future, my name. And now she was planning my absence. Not a divorce, not a goodbye, something far more sinister. A future without me. Not because I walked away, but because I wouldn't be breathing. The weight of that truth crushed something in me. And yet, in the middle of that suffocating darkness, I found clarity. A decision shaped by instinct, not rage. I would not confront her. I would not let her see me broken. If she believed I was a fool, then I would wear the mask she had already written for me. I would play my role. I would smile, kiss her goodnight, ask about her day, all while preparing for something she couldn't see coming. Because now I knew who she really was. And soon, she would know who I could become. When I finally returned home, the storm had quieted, but the air still carried the weight of something unfinished. The house looked the same, but nothing was the same anymore. I slipped through the door like a ghost. She was upstairs, asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the sound of her breath. It was soft, peaceful, like someone who had no idea their perfect plan had just been heard. I went to bed, lay beside her, and stared at the ceiling. She shifted slightly in her sleep, maybe even reached for me. But I didn't move, because something inside me had already died. And what replaced it wasn't fear, it was focus. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of something else. Something colder, something calculated. A game she had started without realizing I'd become a player too. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me. But from that night on, I never truly slept again. The human mind is strange. It doesn't always react the way you expect when truth knocks the air from your lungs. You'd think betrayal of this magnitude would ignite fury, would pull screams from your throat or shatter furniture in a storm of heartbreak. But no. In the days that followed, I became eerily calm. Almost too calm. I carried myself like a man on autopilot, drifting through my own life like a stranger. Every movement was precise, every word carefully measured. I went to work, I answered emails, I smiled at coworkers. I even made her coffee in the mornings, just like I always had. It was muscle memory now, habit born of years of domestic rhythm. The kind of habits people mistake for love. But inside, I was watching everything. Every step she took, every glance at her phone, every time she left the house with that little hint of perfume she never wore for me anymore. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was a witness, a collector of moments, a man building a case with every breath. It's strange how clear things become once the veil is ripped away. Before that night, I saw our marriage through the lens of loyalty, of sacrifice. I believed we were a team, that all couples had rough patches, that her distance was stress, not secrets, that her late nights were just the consequence of an evolving career. I had rationalized every red flag, every gut instinct, because love has a way of silencing your inner alarms. But now, every moment of the past 6 years replayed itself in my head like a broken film reel. And this time I saw everything. The subtle ways she avoided eye contact when I brought up money. How she stopped saying, "I love you" first. How she'd flinch ever so slightly when I touched her unexpectedly. Little things, little lies. They piled up now like ash over a fire long since burned out. I remember the day we bought the house. Her smile was wide and bright, her excitement contagious. She walked through the empty rooms barefoot, talking about where to put our books, where to hang photos, where we'd raise children someday. I believed her. I bought the whole dream, wrapped in white paint and hardwood floors. I remember painting that guest room yellow because she said it was a hopeful color. I remember thinking how lucky I was that someone like her wanted a future with someone like me. And now I know she never really did. What she wanted was security, a roof, a man who would put in the hours so she didn't have to think about bills or broken plumbing. I had been that man, a provider, a shield, But I hadn't been her man for a long time. Someone else had filled that space, and apparently filled it so completely that I had become disposable. I started to wonder when it began. When she first looked at me and saw something temporary. A man whose expiration date could be chosen without consequence. Was it a moment? A gradual drift? Or had she been capable of this from the very beginning? It was a dangerous place for the mind to linger. But I couldn't help myself. I looked at photos, our wedding day, her birthday dinners, vacations by the sea, and studied her face like it was a crime scene. I searched for cracks in her smile, shadows in her eyes, anything that might have warned me. I found none. She had been perfect. That was the most terrifying part. Her performance was flawless. And now, that perfection haunted me. Every smile in those photos felt staged. Every laugh rehearsed. I felt like I was mourning a woman who never truly existed. Like I had fallen in love with a ghost, a beautifully constructed illusion designed to earn my trust, my loyalty, my devotion, and eventually my death. The idea that she had let me sleep beside her, night after night, while planning how to erase me, it crawled beneath my skin. She had kissed me, held me, let me carry her burdens and worries, all while fantasizing about my absence. That kind of coldness, it doesn't belong to ordinary people. It belongs to predators. And yet, somehow, she still laughed at my jokes. I kept thinking back to the little rituals we shared. Sunday mornings, cooking together, the way she used to steal fries off my plate and pretend she didn't. It felt like some kind of long con, like I had been cast as a supporting character in a drama she was directing, a script she intended to end with my exit, sudden and permanent. But I wasn't going to let her write the ending. Not anymore. My clarity hardened into resolve. I realized I was playing a role now, too. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was the audience, the detective, and maybe, if I allowed it, the executioner. But not in the way she expected. Not with violence or chaos. No, my path would be slower, sharper, cleaner. The kind of justice you only understand when you've been dragged through betrayal barefoot. I began documenting everything. Quietly. Her schedule. Her messages. Bank statements. Phone records. I became obsessed with details, hungry for proof. Because I knew she'd try to play innocent when the time came. She would smile, maybe even cry. She would play the victim, claim I was unstable. But I was going to make sure there was no room left for her lies. And the strangest part? She still had no idea. She still kissed me goodnight. She still asked me if I wanted coffee. She still laughed when I made fun of late-night infomercials. And I still played along. Because now I understood the rules of the game. She had built our life on lies. Lies I once believed were love. And while she thought I was still under the illusion, I was quietly dismantling the illusion itself. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. For now, I was just awake, wide awake, in a world where the woman I once adored had signed my death warrant with a whisper. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not with the murder. And not with the lie. There's a moment after betrayal when grief becomes strategy. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the cold, clear understanding that survival now requires performance. I had spent years loving her honestly. Now, I would deceive her deliberately. That was the only way forward. She believed I knew nothing. She moved through our house with confidence, even grace, the same smile, the same voice, the same little touches. To an outsider, we were an ideal couple. But I wasn't an outsider anymore. I had slipped behind the curtain. I knew the machinery. I knew that the hands that cupped my face in affection were the same hands that might someday fasten my seatbelt before sabotaging my brakes. Pretending not to know became its own kind of power. There was a strange thrill in it, a dark electricity under the skin. Every time she said she loved me, I nodded. Every time she kissed my cheek, I kissed her back. And every time she left the house, I checked my watch and made notes. I studied her like a scientist watching a dangerous animal, careful not to startle it, careful not to get too close. The disguise I wore became second nature. I laughed in all the right places. I remembered anniversaries. I even left her little notes, the kind I used to write when I was still hopeful. She'd smile when she found them, sometimes even blush. It made me sick, but I smiled too. That's what masks are for. Behind mine, I was building a case. I started with her phone. It wasn't easy. She had become more careful, locking things, deleting messages, changing passwords. But there are always breadcrumbs if you know where to look. Cloud backups, sync devices, photo metadata. The digital world leaves a trail no matter how clean you think your hands are. I found messages she thought were gone, hidden folders, a second email account. The lover had a name now, a face, a pattern. He wasn't some mysterious shadow. He was real, and he was bold. They had met in places I'd taken her to first, the restaurant by the lake, the hiking trail we once called ours. It wasn't just infidelity. It was erasure. They were painting over the memories I thought were sacred. And still, I said nothing, because now I was no longer interested in stopping them. I was interested in something else entirely. Control. Let them believe I was weak. Let them move forward, cocky and confident, believing the plan was still secret. That was their mistake. People like them, narcissists with fantasies of dominance, always underestimate silence. They confuse quiet with ignorance. They confuse calm with surrender. But I was never more awake than in those weeks. My days were structured like missions. I documented. I traced. I backed up everything. I began visiting lawyers, anonymously at first, and speaking to private investigators. I rented a storage unit in another town and began moving small, unnoticeable items there. Originals of documents, copies of records, even some cash. I was building my exit, or at least building a place to stand when the house collapsed. All the while, I played the part. She believed the mask, completely. That was perhaps the most damning revelation of all. She truly thought I could be that blind, that unaware. It revealed how little respect she had for my intelligence. She thought I was dumb enough to die without noticing the poison in my tea. She didn't know I had stopped drinking anything she handed me. Paranoia? Maybe, but justified. Because when someone wants you gone, everything becomes a weapon. A sandwich, a trip suggestion, a faulty railing on the stairs. And all of it can be cloaked in love. That's the danger of betrayal. It doesn't arrive with fangs and fire. It arrives wearing your favorite sweater, holding your hand. It was around this time that I stopped referring to her as my wife in my own mind. She became something else, an entity, a force. I no longer saw her as the woman I once married. She was a role she had performed, and performed well. But now that I'd seen behind the curtain, I could never unsee it. I began to study psychology, not out of fascination, but necessity. I read about sociopaths, manipulation, patterns of deceit. I found too many matches. The lack of remorse, the easy lying, the fluid shift between charm and coldness. She was a textbook I had never known I was reading. But knowledge is power, and I was finally beginning to understand the rules of her game. There was one moment I'll never forget, a small, unremarkable moment to anyone else. She was brushing her hair, looking in a mirror, humming something tuneless. I stood behind her, watching the reflection, and for a second I saw it. Not fear, not guilt, not even affection. I saw calculation, not aimed at me directly, not in that moment, but ambient, constant like a second heartbeat beneath the surface. She was always thinking 3 moves ahead, always adjusting her performance based on what she thought I knew. It chilled me, because in that moment, I realized the truth. She wasn't just playing a role. She didn't have another self. This was who she really was. a performance so deep she no longer remembered she was acting. But I did, and that made all the difference. I was not angry yet. That part would come later, and it would come hot. But for now, I was cold, focused, sharp. She wanted me to die confused, blind, pathetic, perhaps in a car crash or a mysterious heart attack. She wanted an exit that would clean the slate for her new life, a life built on insurance payouts and crocodile tears. But I was going to give her something else. I was going to make her live, live with the fallout, live with the unraveling, live with the slow, methodical collapse of every comfort she thought was permanent. Because death is too clean, and she didn't deserve clean. Time began to stretch in strange ways. When you live with someone plotting your death, every moment becomes heavy. Every breath you take in the same room becomes loaded with meaning. But she didn't see it. She walked through our home like a queen, unaware her crown had already cracked. She still kissed my cheek when I brought her coffee. She still asked how my meetings went. She still curled up on the couch to binge her shows, legs tucked under her, as if she wasn't sharpening a blade behind her back. And I, the willing ghost in this haunted house, smiled. From the outside, we were fine, better than fine. Friends commented that we seemed closer than ever. Her parents beamed at our strong marriage. But beneath that polished surface, I moved like a shadow, quiet, deliberate, watching. It became a routine, a pattern. Every time she left the house, I tracked the time, marked it in a small notebook I kept hidden in the garage behind a fake panel in my tool cabinet. I noted where she said she was going and compared it to where she actually went. GPS history, Apple Watch locations, even timestamps from smart home devices told me more than she ever could. That's the thing about living in the digital age. Liars leave footprints everywhere. She wasn't very careful anymore. She thought she didn't need to be. I think she assumed my blind trust was permanent, that my devotion had dulled any edge I once had. But devotion only made the betrayal sharper. Now I moved like a man with nothing left to lose, not recklessly, but with a precision born from heartbreak. It wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. I had already seen enough. It was about understanding her fully. How deep did this go? How far was she willing to push? Who else knew? That's when I decided to follow her. Not every time, just the ones that mattered. I learned her lover's name first. Not from snooping through her phone, though that had offered clues, but from a bank notification. A deposit she made, oddly timed, followed by a Venmo transfer with a single red heart emoji. I traced the account. From there, it unraveled fast. His name was Corey, mid-30s, Pezona Trina, divorced, no kids, and apparently very comfortable playing house with married women who owned large homes and even larger life insurance policies. I felt a strange sort of pity for him at first, until I saw them together. The first time was in a parking garage downtown. She thought she was clever, parking on the third level where there were no cameras. She didn't know I'd installed a tiny dash cam inside her own car 2 weeks earlier. When I pulled the footage that evening, my hands didn't even shake. I just watched. There they were, my wife in the coat I bought her last Christmas, laughing as she leaned into his chest, his hands on her hips, her mouth moving close to his ear. I watched it all in silence, not because I was numb, but because fury is quiet when it's absolute. In the days that followed, I followed him too. He had no idea. He was careless, confident. I learned his schedule: morning clients at the gym, mid-afternoon breaks at a smoothie bar, late evening visits to an apartment he kept in a run-down building outside the city. I took photos, not for blackmail, just for the record, for the day when the truth would be needed. And I started to realize something that changed everything. He wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't the one pulling strings. She was. He followed her like a dog, eager to please. She led every conversation. She booked the hotels. She transferred the money. She orchestrated it all. And when I followed them to a motel on the edge of town one Tuesday night, I didn't park nearby. I didn't need more footage. I already had what I came for. Instead, I walked across the road and sat in the dark behind a gas station, staring at their room from a distance. And I made a choice. This would not end with me confronting them in a blaze of screaming or fists. That will make me a headline. Accancionare tale. Another man who snapped. No, my path would be quieter, smarter, more devastating. Because the greatest punishment isn't destruction, it's exposure. Let the world see who she really is. Let her friends, her family, her employer, let them all watch as the image she worked so hard to curate crumbled like wet paper. And when the dust settles, let her realize the only thing left standing is the man she tried to bury. And I would be there, watching, alive, undone perhaps, but never defeated. Over the next few weeks, I intensified my efforts. I installed software, bought a burner phone, set up a digital vault where I stored everything, time-stamped, dated, cross-referenced. I built a copy for my lawyer, another for my sister, a final one I kept offline, in a safe behind a picture frame she never bothered to look behind. I began creating distance financially too, transferring funds, freezing shared credit cards, preparing legal maneuvers that would make it nearly impossible for her to touch my assets without triggering alarms. I did it quietly, respectfully, with the same professionalism I once reserved for work. And still, she had no idea. Every night, she returned home, smiling. Every night, she curled up beside me, pretending to love the man she hoped would soon disappear. And every night, I lay there, still as stone, knowing something she didn't. The curtain was about to fall, and this time, the mask wouldn't come off gently. There is a particular silence that comes right before a collapse. It's not the absence of sound, it's the tension underneath it. A vibration just beneath the surface, like a piano wire pulled too tight. That was what life had become inside our home. A beautiful stage set where every vase was in place, every smile rehearsed, and every gesture loaded with a hidden edge. But now the game was shifting. I had been silent long enough, watching, recording, mapping her deceit. I had followed her shadows and memorized the shape of every lie. And now I began to turn screws, slowly, carefully, so gently she wouldn't even notice, until her sense of control began to flicker like a dying bulb. It started small, a misplaced item here, a slightly moved object there. Nothing obvious, just enough to create that nagging feeling. Her favorite necklace not in the drawer, but in the kitchen. A pair of shoes she swore she left by the door, suddenly back in the closet. The burner phone I'd planted in the laundry room on silent, set to buzz when I was at work. She began to question herself, barely at first, then more openly. I saw it in the way her eyes scanned the room a moment longer than necessary, in a way she lingered over her purse as if trying to remember what she'd forgotten. Doubt, I realized, was more powerful than confrontation. People like her need control like oxygen. Once you disrupt their reality, even subtly, they begin to unravel. Their confidence cracks, their mask slips, and when the cracks form, truth begins to leak through. She started drinking more. Not enough to raise alarms, just more often. One glass of wine turned into two, then three. Her words would sometimes slur just slightly after dinner. Her sleep grew restless. She'd toss and turn, whisper things I couldn't understand. And I would lie beside her, perfectly still, watching the woman who once plotted my death come undone by her own paranoia. I changed my routine too, just enough to be noticed. I started leaving earlier for work, coming home without warning. Sometimes I'd pretend to forget things and return moments after I'd left. Once I caught her on the phone in the garage, her voice low and clipped like someone cornered. She didn't know I was watching from the side mirror of my truck. I didn't say a word. That was the brilliance of it. I never accused. I never even hinted. I simply created space for her guilt to grow wild. Unchecked, unspoken, but felt in every corner of our home. She tried to maintain control. She overcompensated, surprise dinners, flirty texts, offers to spice up our marriage. It was all theater, a desperate act by someone who felt the walls shifting and couldn't find the source of the tremors. She was no longer sure of the story she was telling, and the uncertainty ate at her. Then I took it a step further. I left her a note, not the kind I used to write, not sweet or romantic, just a single sheet of paper slipped under her pillow one night. No name, no signature, just one sentence. I know what you did. That morning, she didn't speak. Her movements were stiff, her smile tighter than usual. She sat through breakfast barely touching her food. Her hand shook when she poured her coffee. But she said nothing, and neither did I, because the moment you push a liar into admitting truth, they retreat. But if you leave them in silence, they build their own prison, brick by brick, lie by lie, unsure where the threat is coming from or when it will arrive. That's how I wanted her. Not broken, unstable, because instability breeds mistakes, and mistakes reveal intent. Within a week, she had booked an impromptu therapy appointment. I knew because the calendar sync revealed it. She claimed it was about stress. I listened, nodded, asked if she wanted to talk. She declined. Of course she did. You don't confess murder plans to your husband over toast. But now I knew something even more important than guilt. I knew she was afraid. And that fear, that was leverage. The balance of power had shifted. She could feel it. Her lover stopped calling as often. The transaction slowed. I think she warned him. Maybe she said someone was watching. Maybe she believed it was paranoia. But it didn't matter. The results were the same. Cracks in their little empire of deceit. She no longer slept soundly. She double-checked the doors at night, something I always used to do. Now she peered through the blinds, unsure what she expected to see. I could see the exhaustion settle under her eyes, the questions spinning behind every glance. And then she made the mistake I'd been waiting for. She tried to cover her tracks. I found it in the digital logs, files deleted, messages erased, contacts removed. It was too sudden, too targeted, a cleanup job, but she didn't know I had copies. Archive, screenshots, logs stored in 3 separate encrypted drives. The moment she started erasing, she confirmed everything. Guilt doesn't clean up unless there's a mess to hide. I realized then how close we were to the edge, not just of exposure, but of implosion. She was unraveling faster than I expected, and I had to be careful not to tip the balance too far too soon. Because when someone feels cornered, they get dangerous. And she had already proven what she was capable of. So I slowed down. I pulled back the pressure, let her catch her breath. Because I wasn't interested in panic. I was interested in collapse. Not with a bang, but a whisper. There comes a point in every deception when the masks slip for good. Not because the performer chooses to remove them, but because the weight of pretending becomes too heavy. For her, that moment came in early spring, just as the frost began to reseed and the world started to bloom again. But not her. She was withering. The fear I had planted had grown roots. She no longer walked with confidence. Her smile, once effortless, charming, almost disarming, had become rehearsed, like an actress forgetting her lines mid-performance. She looked over her shoulder more often now. She left rooms with half-finished thoughts. Her routines, once so precise, had become erratic. She was waiting for the fall, and she didn't know where it would come from. And then it happened. He vanished. The man who had once been her escape, her fantasy, her co-conspirator, was suddenly gone. No trafe, no text, no email, no volvie, just silence. It began with a missed meeting, a dinner she said she'd been planning for weeks. She came home late that night, but this time her expression wasn't satisfied. It was blank, cold. She tried to hide it, pretending to be tired, distracted by work, but I could see the truth. Something had shifted, something had broken, and I knew, without needing confirmation, that Corey had disappeared. She tried to reach him. I watched it all from a distance. The search history on our shared devices, the missed calls, the login attempts into his email. He had cut her off completely, vanished like smoke in wind. And just like that, the anchor she had relied on, the one she believed would save her from the weight of me, was gone. But what she didn't know was that I had helped him disappear. Not physically. I hadn't harmed him. That was never my plan. But I had given him a reason to run, and just enough of a push. It had started weeks earlier in a slow build-up. I sent him what he needed to see. Screenshots, clips, bank transactions. Messages from her talking about the accident, the plan, the payout. Nothing threatening. Nothing that could be traced back to me. Just facts. Just truth, stripped of emotion, packaged like evidence in a court file. I knew the kind of man he was. I had studied him. He liked control, yes, but he feared consequence. And he had never been in love with her, not really. She was a game, a challenge, and now she was a liability. He didn't reply, not once, but I watched his phone activity spike. His Google searches changed. His social media presence slowed. He canceled appointments, closed a bank account, and 3 days later, he was gone, vanished, and she unraveled with him. The look in her eyes those first few days wasn't just confusion. It was betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had plotted my end was now experiencing the sting of abandonment, of being discarded like trash. I watched her drown in the very same silence she had once gifted me. She became restless. She cleaned the house obsessively, rearranged furniture, cooked meals, and left them untouched. She began taking long walks alone, her shoulders hunched, her phone clenched tightly in her fist like a weapon. And at night, she sat on the edge of our bed, staring out the window, as if waiting for someone who would never come back. There was something deeply tragic about it, and yet I felt nothing. No sympathy, no guilt, just clarity. Because this was never about making her suffer the way I had. It was about the reveal. The moment she'd have to face the truth she had spent so long burying. That she had gambled with a human life, and now everything she'd built on top of that gamble was crumbling. The house began to feel colder. Not in temperature, in spirit. The laughter was gone. The music, the simple rhythms of life that once defined our home. Now was silent, stale. She moved through it like a ghost, haunting her own life. She started leaving lights on in rooms she wasn't using. I think she was afraid of the dark, of being alone in it. I never spoke about it. I never confronted her. But every time she looked at me, I knew she wondered if I knew. And that wondering, it ate at her. It infected her like a disease, and there was no cure, no reassurance I could give that wouldn't make it worse. That's the genius of silence. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't point fingers. It just waits, patiently, while the guilty rot in their own fear. And then came the day she finally cracked. I heard it before I saw it. Glass. Breaking. A plate, maybe, followed by something heavier. A chair tipped over. I stayed upstairs while she screamed alone in the kitchen, pouring her rage into objects that couldn't fight back. I didn't interfere. I let her rage fill the house like smoke. Let her scream into the void she created. Let her hear her own echo. Let her finally feel what I had felt for months. Isolation, confusion, the slow unraveling of sanity. She left the house for a few days after that, claimed she needed space. I nodded, understanding completely. I didn't ask where she was going. I already knew. I had eyes on the rental she had found under a fake name, a temporary hideaway. But even there, she couldn't escape what was closing in. Because guilt, once planted, grows fast. And she had watered it well. When she returned, she was different, quieter, eyes red, skin pale. She had aged, not in years, but in spirit. Something had broken in her, something she couldn't patch with lipstick or fake apologies. And I knew the moment had come. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about conclusion. She had spent years building a life on lies, betrayal, and secret fantasies of freedom built on my grave. Now she had nothing. No novel, no plan, no control, and soon no more secrets. There was no dramatic ending, no screaming match, no police sirens or courtroom confessions. In truth, the final collapse came quietly, like everything else she'd built. Quiet lies, quiet cheating, quiet plans for my disappearance. So it felt almost poetic that the end came the same way. Quiet. By the time spring gave way to summer, she had become a shadow. The vibrant, laughing woman who once filled our home with plans and stories and soft humming under her breath had hollowed out. What remained was pale, brittle, and haunted, but not by ghosts, by memory, by truth. She still didn't know what I had done, and that was the point. I wanted her to live every day wondering, not knowing whether the walls were closing in or if they had already closed, not knowing if the life she once controlled had already slipped through her fingers. Because there is no cage more cruel than a mind turned against itself. That's the beauty of letting the guilty live. She moved through our home like a visitor now. She rarely touched me, rarely spoke. She avoided eye contact, unsure what I saw when I looked at her. And I gave her nothing. No questions, no anger, just kindness. Cold, immaculate kindness. The kind that leaves people confused. The kind that forces them to ask themselves what they've done. And in that confusion, I planted the end. I met with the lawyer the following Tuesday. We had prepared everything: financial disclosures, real estate filings, protection for every asset with my name on it. I transferred the house into a trust 6 weeks earlier. She hadn't noticed. I'd rerouted her access to our joint accounts, frozen her cards, replaced passwords. Silently. She would find out soon enough. The documents arrived on a Thursday. I wasn't there when they did. I made sure of that. I wanted her to open that envelope in silence. I wanted her to feel her world shift without anyone to scream at. I returned home that evening like it was any other day, grocery bags in hand. Calm, predictable. She was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, still in her work clothes, her hair twisted up like she hadn't moved for hours. The envelope was in front of her, opened, but she said nothing. She didn't ask questions, didn't yell, didn't plead, because deep down, she already knew. Not the specifics, not how far I'd gone, but she knew the story was over. She was never in control. Not really. She had just been holding a role that was written for her. And when the curtain finally fell, there were no flowers, no applause, just the cold realization that her audience had walked out months ago. In the following days, she tried to keep her dignity. She packed slowly, methodically, avoiding my eyes, her shoulders drawn like someone bracing for a blow that never came. But I had no blows left, no vengeance, just space. Space for her to leave and take the weight of her sins with her. She cried once. I saw it through the hallway mirror. She thought I was outside. Her back was turned, her hand pressed over her mouth. It was the first time I saw her break without performance. Not for attention, not for pity, just raw collapse. And strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. She left on a Sunday. No bouvier. Just an echo where her footsteps used to be. I sat in the quiet afterward, not sure what I was supposed to feel. Not angry, not relieved, just clean, as if something rotten had been carved out of me. Painful, yes, but necessary, like finally pulling a tooth that had been poisoning the blood. The house remained mine, not just legally, spiritually. She no longer lingered in the corners. Her scent faded. Her voice vanished from the walls. It was just me now, and somehow that was more than enough. I rebuilt, slowly, not just the home, but the man who had once lived there. I went back to cooking, left the windows open again, slept with the door unlocked, because I was no longer afraid. Not of death, not of her, not of being alone. I kept the files, though. Every screenshot, every message, every backup. Not out of vengeance, not for blackmail, just as proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't crazy, that once someone had loved me with one hand while quietly planning my funeral with the other. And yet, I had survived. I didn't just survive. I won. Not in the way the movies show it. There were no explosions, no confissions, just a man who saw the trap, stepped around it, and let the hunter walk straight into their own collapse. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me, if she tells a different version of the story to others, one where I was cruel or cold, where she was the victim. Let her. Let her write fiction. I have the truth, and the truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs peace. And that's what I finally had. As I sat on the porch that final evening, coffee in hand, watching the sun dip below the trees, I realized something that brought a strange, quiet smile to my face. She tried to kill me, and yet I was more alive than ever.